Has the news been getting you down? I'm Megan McArdle, and I'm here to help. I'm the host of a news show from Washington Post Opinion called Reasonably Optimistic, and it's an antidote to the pessimism that's riddling America right now. Every Wednesday, I'm going to talk to people who see a path forward.
It does seem to me that there is some awakening of a desire to act together, to solve problems where they are.
I am a believer in America, and it's worth fighting for.
Join me Wednesdays on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts.
She used to be a bail investigator. She wound up leaving the job because of some very troubling cases. I'll give you a hint. Homicides increased 89% due to the policies that they had. Welcome to the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. In the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show, we are joined by special guests talking about their experiences, the realities of investigating crimes, plus those who have experienced horrendous trauma. Police, first responders, military, and victims of crime share their stories. Hi, I'm John J. Wiley. In addition to being a broadcaster, I'm also a retired police sergeant. Be sure to check out our website, letradio.com, and also like us on Facebook. Search for the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. Do you want to be a guest on Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show and podcast? It's really quite simple. And before you get into this notion that I'm not a cop, I wasn't a cop, I don't have something to contribute. Well, the show is about investigating crime. That's one aspect of it from the real life perspective of those who did it. And then it's also about trauma, how trauma impacted them, often crime-based, but not always. Our guests quite often are law enforcement officers, other first responders, military, victims of crime, their spouses or survivors, talking about how trauma impacted them, what happened, how it affected their lives, and how they rebuilt their lives after. If you want to be a guest, just contact me. It's really simple. Send an email to jay@letradio.com. That's jay@letradio.com. Or go to letradio.com and the Contact Us page, and you can get me right there as well. Joining us on the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show, we have Kelly from Pennsylvania contacting us, and we had a long conversation about Pennsylvania. I'm a Maryland boy, and I do not miss the cold weather one bit. Not at all. I do miss the Chesapeake. I miss the people, a lot of other things. But Kelly is a former bail investigator for the state of Pennsylvania, which she'll talk about in a few moments. She left that. She went into private practice. The best places you can get more information about her is, number one is on X. It's Kelly Rae Reports. It's RAE, Kelly Rae Reports on X. And also mindfulcoastcounseling.com. That's mindful, COAST counseling.com. Kelly, thanks for your service, and thanks for being a guest on the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. Both very much appreciated.
Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you here. And I got to be honest. There's some different things in Maryland and Pennsylvania, but I never understood, and to this day, I have no idea what a bail investigator is and what their job is. What did you do?
So it was actually through the arm of the criminal courts in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and we worked inside the intake department at the Allegheny County Jail, and we interviewed people who were arrested on new charges or failure to appear bench warrants, basically just to get their demographic information so we knew if they were working, if they had issues with drugs and alcohol, but most importantly, where they were staying at. And we would attempt to verify that information with a reference that they gave us. That was one part of the job, and we would compile that into a report, and we would give it to the magistrate who would be arraigning that defendant later on that day. So the options would be an ROR bond, which would usually apply to new offenders, or a DUI, a non-monetary bond where we would say, you don't have to pay any money, but we want you to report to our office either in person or by phone. And then there was the no release, where we were saying you were too much of a threat to the community or to the victims, or we think that you're a flight risk, so we want you to have to pay a monetary bond. And then in cases of homicides, we would say no bond. You have to be held without bond. So that was the job, and we could do like 30 cases a shift, and we were a 24/7 operation, 365 days a year. But we were a division of the criminal courts.
And how many years did you do this?
14 and a half years.
You don't sound like you've been at any place for 14 some odd years.
Well, I started at 29 years old in 2008,
Wow.
and I left in 2022, in July of 2022.
And we're going to talk about some of the reasons why you left in a moment. One of the things that I hear quite often, not just from you, but my own experience, and not just my own experience, but other guests as well. I was a Baltimore police officer in Baltimore, Maryland. It's very similar to Pittsburgh in a lot of different ways. And by the way, go Ravens. I'm not going to say anything about your Steelers. But the biggest problem I had was that you would arrest someone for serious, violent crimes, and they'd be out walking before you're done with the paperwork.
Yes, sir. You took the words right out of my hand. Before the ink would be dry on the police officer's report, they'd be walking right out the door. Literally, they would walk past us. When we would be outside taking a break, they would walk out before we did at the end of the night, just like you said, and that was incredibly frustrating.
And I didn't, listen, and I'll just say it this way. I was in 4 shootings in a little more than 10 years. And the first 2, I never fired a shot back. But the one thing that they all had in common was they all had multiple prior convictions for violent crimes. And yet they were still walking the street. Yes,
100%. And that got worse as my career went on. In the beginning, we tried very hard to hold on to those people. We were not able to always prevent them from posting a bond. The bondsmen were out there, and they only, of course, charge a small percentage of the total bond. And so our goal was to have it set high enough so that it would be harder for a violent offender to get out, not just for the safety of the community, but so often for the safety of the victims that were in the case. And, sometimes those bonds would get posted and sometimes they would get withdrawn altogether. But the recidivism wasn't as high halfway through my career. It took a huge jump, and that's when things got incredibly chaotic.
I know from my notes that in our prior conversations, you have a thing for numbers, and part of my notes show that in, I think it was 2020, in the Pittsburgh area, they had an 89% increase in homicides. And these were, I'm assuming, they were a lot of people that had been arrested multiple times before.
Yes. When I first started in the first half of my career, we took pending cases into account when we made our reports for the magistrates, and we had a little box to check if somebody had a pending case, and we had a little block to put 1, 2, 3 pending cases. That box was always empty. We did not have people coming in over and over and over and over again. By the time I left in 2022, we had people with 16, 17 pending cases. It would take us going from 20 minutes to do a case to an hour and a half or 2 hours to do a case. The system had no teeth, and the defendants knew it. And so they knew they were getting out. They would yell and taunt us with the fact that they were going to get out, that we were wasting our time. And quite frankly, we were recommending that they get out.
Yeah. We'll talk about that in a few moments. You left the job in 2022?
Yes.
Did you retire, or did you say, that's it, I'm done with this?
I said, that's it, I'm done with this. And it was a decision. It's one of the hardest decisions, probably the hardest decision I've ever made in my life, because I had really grown accustomed to that job. I always wanted to work in the justice system and in law enforcement. And I had a badge. I'd become incredibly close with a lot of the officers.
Well, let's take a break and we'll turn that conversation in just a moment. We're talking with Kelly Rae Robertson. She goes by Kelly for short. She is a former bail investigator for the state of Pennsylvania. You can find her Kelly Rae Reports on X. That's RAE, Kelly Rae Reports on X. And her website is mindfulcoastcounseling.com. That's mindfulcoastcounseling.com. If you're on the Clubhouse drop-in audio chat app, be sure to look for me and follow me. My name's John, the letter J, Wiley, W-I-L-E-Y. You can also search for @LET Radio Show. That's John J. Wiley, W-I-L-E-Y, LET Radio Show on the Clubhouse drop-in audio chat app. This is Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Of all the radio stations in the United States, there are no other shows like the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. And on Facebook, there's only one official page. Do a search on Facebook for the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. And be sure to like the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show Facebook page.
Has the news been getting you down? I'm Megan McCardle, and I'm here to help. I'm the host of a news show from Washington Post Opinion called Reasonably Optimistic. And it's an antidote to the pessimism that's riddling America right now. Every Wednesday, I'm going to talk to people who see a path forward.
It does seem to me that there is some awakening of a desire to act together, to solve problems where they are.
You know, I am a believer in America, and that's worth fighting for.
Join me Wednesdays on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts.
Returning our conversation with Kelly Rae Robertson on the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. Contact us from the great state of Pennsylvania or the Commonwealth. I think is it a Commonwealth of Pennsylvania?
It was the criminal courts of Allegheny County and Pittsburgh.
Gotcha. See, I, for one, I spent a lot of my life in Virginia before I went to Maryland, and that's a Commonwealth. And I don't know the difference between a Commonwealth and a state, but it sounds pretty nifty if you ask me. You used to be a bail investigator, and we'll talk about why she left in a few moments. Best place to find her, two places online. Kelly Rae Reports. That's Kelly, R-A-E, Reports on X. And also, her website is mindfulcoastcounseling.com. That's mindfulcoastcounseling.com, C-O-A-S-T. And we'll talk about that in a few moments. Earlier, before we went to break, you're talking about the difficult decision of walking away from this career. And you said that part of it was, and I really understand this, Kelly, because it becomes part of who you are. It becomes part of your life. It becomes part of your plans. It becomes everything. And then you decided, I'm done with this. And I'm paraphrasing, but it was difficult for you.
Yes, it was horrible. I cried the entire walk out the door. And, of course, we had to go through several doors to get in and out of the jail and be let in and out by control. And so it was a very long and painful walk. And my coworker was just, she was a newer girl. I had trained her, and she said, one step in front of the other, Kelly, this is the hardest part. And I cried the whole way home, and I think I mourned for a couple of years, to be quite frank. It's taken this long, I think, to be able to talk about my experiences there and how big of a part of a life that was for me without breaking down, because there was a point where I was very proud of what I did.
Oh, yeah.
And it was my identity.
Look, I'm not going to bash you for that. And people love to throw around they shouldn't make it part of their identity. When I was a police, that's what I did. That was who I was. And I became very close to my coworkers. We went to weddings together. We did christenings. We did everything together. And when I got hurt and retired, it was all over quickly. And when it was over, I was like yesterday's news.
Yes. Yes.
It's like you're not a part of it anymore. And we talk about, and by the way, a lot of that had to do with me because I talked to a lot of these coworkers years later, and it's like nothing ever happened. No time passed by. But I had a lot of resentment, a lot of animosity towards City Hall and Department, not my coworkers so much.
Right, yes.
There was a case.
I can totally understand that.
Yeah, I look, I understand your frustration and why you left. And I understand why you feel like it's part of you. What I want to hear about is there was a case in particular, and there's an old phrase that people use, a straw that broke the camel's back. It doesn't mean that it's small. It doesn't mean that it's insignificant. It means there's usually lots of things preceding that. But there was a particular case involving a Pitt student that kind of broke you.
Yes. She was 20 years old, and she was in a volatile relationship. And she really broke the mold of what we think of when we think of what a victim in a domestic case looks like. She was not that girl. She was a young, beautiful Pitt student. She had her whole life ahead of her. She was a good student. She came from a good family. And she did everything right. She got a PFA. She stopped contacting him, and
what's the PSA? Is that restraining orders?
A protection, a protection from abuse order. So that's what she was advised to do by the police, and she did it. A lot of women and men victims, we would say, get a PFA, and maybe we could talk them into getting a temporary one, but to actually follow through by going to family division and having hearings, it's a lot, especially if you're a busy person. You don't want to necessarily go into court and be interrogated.
Right.
So we can usually get people to do the first part, but following through is much harder. She did all of that. She did all of the legwork, and so did her family. They stood behind her 100%. And we got him for crawling in her kitchen window at her apartment, which was off-campus housing in Oakland and Pittsburgh. And he was, of course, arrested, but he wasn't arrested for about 4 days. It took police that long to catch up with him. They charged him. Her roommates scared him away that day. So only God knows what would have happened to her if they weren't there. So he flees and he takes off. And the Pittsburgh police are actively searching for him. And they catch him and they bring him down to the Allegheny County Jail. And I get that case. And it's my coworker's job to interview him. And it's my job to look at his history and then see what kind of recommendation we should give. Now, it's important to note that the computer would spit out a recommendation based off of the information we would put in, meaning numbers. But it was our ability to contact a supervisor who was on call to say, I don't think this is a good idea. Can we move this person up? Can we move them down? Moving them up would mean, can I take them from an ROR or a non-monetary bond to a recommendation of no release, meaning we want him to have to pay a bond. Holding on to him would be the perfect case scenario. And you can tell when he was being interviewed, there's glass that would separate us, and there's a tiny slit at the bottom. So we would ask people to sit down so we could hear them and they could hear us. Other than that, it would be difficult for us to hear them. Plus, we're trying to type the information. And as soon as my coworker made contact with him, he refused to sit down. And then it deteriorated from there. He wouldn't tell us where he was staying. He wouldn't give us any information about his parents. He wouldn't give us his cell phone number. And then in the midst of refusing all of this very simple demographic information, he blurts out that he plays basketball for the University of Pittsburgh. I'm within an earshot, and I can hear how defiant he's being. And every question he's saying, call my attorney, call my attorney. And my coworker's like, I'm not calling your attorney. That's not what this is. We're not going to talk about the case. I just need to know where you stay. I just need to know, do you have a driver's license? Do you live in Pennsylvania? Like, I'm not interrogating you that we need an attorney.
Right.
And so when he blurted out that he played ball for Pitt, that was like, why are you telling us this? So I hurried up and I Googled it. And he hadn't been a high scorer for the past 2 years. So it made me think he doesn't play ball for Pitt. And it turns out he wasn't even a student at Pitt anymore. He had gotten thrown off the team. He was no longer actively attending the University of Pittsburgh. So it was a lie. So the most important part of this, though, is his rap sheet had one arrest on it, and that was for rape. And it was another county.
That's a heavy duty. A lot of people will like to read into that, but when you see that, or when I saw that, I should say, alarm bells went off that this is a potentially violent offender. Is that what happened to you?
Absolutely, yes. And it was a case in another county, so I was not able to locate the victim's name in the docket sheets that I had available. But I wanted to know, is this the same victim as the victim in our case, the criminal trespass? So I just dialed 911 from my desk. I'd done that several times for other reasons, and told them who I was and where I was calling from, and they dispatched me to Indiana County's 911, told them the same, who I was, where I was calling from.
Let's take a short break on that note. Return to our conversation with Kelly Rae Robertson in just a few moments. This is the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. You can find her two places. One is on X, Kelly Rae Reports. That's RAE. On X, and also our website, mindfulcoastcounseling.com. That's mindful, COAST counseling.com. This is Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. We'll be right back.
Someone asked, what's the catch? What's the cost? There is no cost for anything on the Law Enforcement Talk radio show and podcast website, letradio.com. letradio.com. Again, that's letradio.com.
The Bleacher Report app is your destination for sports. Right now, the NBA's heating up, March Madness is here, and MLB is almost back. Every day there's a new headline, a new highlight, a new moment you've got to see for yourself. That's why I stay locked in with the Bleacher Report app. For me, it's about staying connected to my sports. I can follow the teams I care about, get real-time scores, breaking news, and highlights all in one place. Download the Bleacher Report app today so you never miss a moment.
Return conversation with Kelly Rae Robertson on the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. Kelly is a former bail investigator for the state of Pennsylvania. She left that job, and we're explaining the reasons why. And hang on, she'll go into more details in a moment. Best place to get her is two places online. One's X, Kelly Rae Reports. It's RAE, Kelly Rae Reports on X. And he also has her website, mindfulcoastcounseling.com. That's COAST, mindfulcoastcounseling.com. Kelly, before we went to break, you're talking about you dialed 911 and you called another county, and were you trying to find out whether or not this person that was the victim of the rape was the same person as the victim in the domestic assault?
Yes, sir. Yes.
And what did you find out?
And I received a phone call from the sergeant for that department, and I told him who I was and why I was calling and where I was calling from, and he said, I don't have that information on me. Let me turn my cruiser back around and go back to the station. And he called me back within probably 3 minutes. And he said, what's the name of your victim? And I told him, and he said, different girl.
Okay.
And I said, okay. And he said, he gets around. And I said, yes, sir, I get that impression. And I remember the words I used. I said, I'm going to try and put a stop to that. And the big red flag, again, another huge red flag, was I considered it far worse for there to be multiple victims as opposed to it being the same victim over and over again, which I know you see a lot in law enforcement. But when it was a different victim, it was like, this is really bad. He does not accept women telling him no. So, right. Of course, our recommendation was spitting out a release on your own recognizance, and I wanted him held.
That was the recommendation from the state through their computer system.
It was saying release on your own recognizance because he had no convictions. He only had one pending case, but the pending case was for rape. And then the charge in Pittsburgh was criminal trespass. And I felt that if her roommates had not been there, God forbid, it would have been far worse than a criminal trespass. So I had to call my supervisor for permission to ask the magistrate for a high bond. And when I called my supervisor, she declined and said no. We had become about metrics and reducing jail population, and it was about letting people go, not keeping people in. And that had changed a year earlier and had been getting much worse. But again, we had that in place where we could call our supervisors and make a case, like, this is what's going on and this is why we don't agree with this assessment. I gave her all of that information, but she declined the override. So and on the criminal
trespass, and I'm not saying this to diminish what he did or what your actions were, but it's like disorderly conduct. It's not a heavy-duty crime.
Right. And that, we can agree. And of course, and on its own, it might look kind of mundane and not really too bad. But when you put it all into the context, and that was the advantage of us being in the jail, is we were able to get all of the stuff that wasn't on the paperwork. We were able to get the demeanor of the defendant and how defiant he was being just through a simple interview. We were able to see that personality, whereas people outside of that office could not. We had to tell them. So when I hung up the phone, I called over to arraignment court and asked for my friend who was the boss on that shift. And I told him, I'm about to send you an assessment on this defendant. I want you to burn it, bury the ashes. Under no circumstances do you follow this assessment and let him out. And he said, who was on the bench? And he said, she always goes with your recommendations. And he said, why don't you come over here and talk to her personally? And I said, if I go over and talk to her and I'm caught by my bosses, I'm in for a lashing.
Mm-hmm.
And I regret that terribly to this day. Because I influenced magistrates in the past. I'd go over and I'd talk to them, and sometimes they didn't want to hear anything I had to say. Others I have relationships with to this day because, I gave them information that if I was a magistrate, I certainly would want to have, because if something were to happen, it's going to be my name in the paper. And I said, listen, and I tried to say, are you sure I said these words exactly after this happened? And they said, no, Kelly, you said it. You said that these words exactly. I said to the man in arraignment court, I said, if he gets out, he's going to kill her. And so he says, I'll go talk to her. And he hangs up and he calls me back and he said, I got you 10,000 straight. That's as high as she was willing to go. And I said, I guess that's better than nothing. Now, quick release is when a bond is set and it gets posted so fast that they don't even get processed into the jail.
Right.
So again, here we go with the paperwork not even being dry, and he's sauntering out the door. And the sheriff's office had an office in the courts that was attached to the jail, and they would bother us all day, and I'd bother them all day. They became very close friends of mine. I respect them very much. And I went over and would tell them what was going on, and I told them, this guy, we just did his case. He's going to kill her. He's going to kill her. Well, he did. He got out, and he broke into her apartment while she was sleeping. And it happened. No, it's important to note that in between the criminal trespass case, he ended up raping another girl. This girl was 17. This is victim number 3. So in between us releasing him and him murdering this Pitt student, he managed to rape again. So Sunday morning, I'm checking the news and I see that a Pitt student was found dead and she was severely injured. And my first thought was, these poor kids, they drink so much on the weekends. She must have fallen down the steps. It was her. And I didn't know. So I come into work on Monday, which was a holiday, a court holiday. And my coworkers knew her. She's a young girl. She's dating a Pittsburgh police officer. And she comes in and says, did you hear about that girl that was beaten to death? Apparently we just did a case on him. And I froze and I said, what was the name of the defendant? And she actually called her boyfriend, and then she was typing it into the computer at the same time, and she told me. And she said, Kelly, you did his case. And I just, thank God my chair was behind me, because I fell into my chair. My knees gave out. I just buried my head in my hands, and I just kept saying, oh, my God, oh, my God, oh, my God.
I can only imagine. First of all, the guilt. We'll talk about in a moment. But number one, we used to have a saying, and I hate saying this, but catching people before they commit the crime, usually it's not a severe crime. It's not going. They can't be charged with something tremendous. And I'm not defending police, but they didn't have a whole lot of options, and the courts didn't have a whole lot of options either, because their whole purpose of bail is a constitutional right, guaranteed to show up for trial. And are you a threat to community? And if there's in the charges you can't show a threat to community, it's tough. It's really tough. You can know all day long. You can suspect all day long, but that doesn't equate to evidence.
The police certainly had their hands tied, and I don't find any fault in anything that they did. They arrested him. They tracked him down every time he did something. It was the courts that kept giving him chance after chance. And sadly, the one person who was deserving of of a chance the most, who hadn't done anything wrong, was the woman he killed.
We're going to take a short break on that note. We're talking with Rae Robertson. She used to be a bail investigator for the state of Pennsylvania. She left that job, which we'll talk about in a few moments. The best place to find her is Kelly Rae Reports on X. It's Kelly, RAE, Reports on X. And her website is mindfulcoastcounseling.com. There's mindful, COAST, counseling.com. When we return on the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show, we're going to talk about the after effects, why she left the job. We know the reasons why, but she's going to explain why from her own mouth. You get to hear it from her. This is Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. How would you like to improve your health? Let's get healthy. Tips you can use today for free. They don't require any money at all. You can download a free ebook, 15 Tips to Improve Your Health, at lethealthy.com. That's lethealthy.com. Again, it's lethealthy.com. And let's get healthy for free.
Has the news been getting you down? I'm Megan McArdle, and I'm here to help. I'm the host of a news show from Washington Post Opinion called Reasonably Optimistic. And it's an antidote to the pessimism that's riddling America right now. Every Wednesday, I'm going to talk to people who see a path forward.
It does seem to me that there is some awakening of a desire to act together to solve problems where they are.
I am a believer in America, and that's worth fighting for.
Join me Wednesdays on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts.
Hey, it's Howie Mandel, and I am inviting you to witness history as me and my Howie Do It gaming team take on Gilly the King and Wallow 267's $1 million gaming in an epic Global Gaming League video game showdown. 4 rounds, multiple games, 1 winner, plus a halftime performance by multi-platinum artist Travie McCoy. Watch all the action and see who wins and advances to the championship match against Neo right now at globalgamingleague.com. That's globalgamingleague.com. Everybody games.
Current conversation with Kelly Rae Robertson on the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. Kelly used to be a bail investigator for the state of Pennsylvania. She left that job for reasons which we'll explain in a few moments. Best places to find her, 2 places online. Kelly Rae Reports on X. It's Kelly, RAE, Reports on X. And her website is mindfulcoastcounseling.com. That's COAST, mindfulcoastcounseling.com. Kelly, I can understand a lot of what you're talking about. I can understand the frustration. I can understand, here's something we didn't get a chance to talk about. Want to stay and want to be the piece of change in a broken system, but is realizing you can only do so much. You made the decision after this case to leave what you were doing.
Yes, I did. I actually stayed another 5 years, which sounds terrible. But the night that it
sound
happened,
terrible. It sounds like you still wanted to be part of the change, and you realize you're beating the head against the wall.
Yes, I reasoned with myself in my own mind that it was better for me to be there and try and fight for cases than to be absent altogether. And there were victims that I had helped get PFAs and things of that nature that would thank me.
And by the way, PSAs, what's that stand for in Pennsylvania?
Protection from abuse order, restraining order.
So
restraining order,
what we used to say, and I have 2 younger daughters. I have 4 younger sisters. I was raised by my mother. My dad was career Navy. He was gone all the time. And I have nothing against these, but protection orders are just pieces of paper. If someone's going to harm you, you need to arm yourself with something other than a piece of paper.
Yes. And it's funny that you mentioned that, because I would have these same conversations. I would say, listen, this just is a piece of paper. All it does is gives the police something more to use to arrest somebody. So if he shows up or if he breaks the however many feet away he has to stay, that's it. And if you're not somebody that's comfortable with a firearm, I totally understand. I would tell them, go to your local sporting goods stores, go to the bat section. The heaviest one you could pick up and swing, you get one for every
whatever you can swing.
Window.
And by the way, my frustration as a police officer was we had domestic violence calls, call after call after call, the same house, same victims, same scenario.
Yes.
And it usually involved alcohol and drugs, where the this case, the ex wound up assaulting her. But the victims would do nothing about it. And we would try, and sometimes they ended horribly. Sometimes they didn't. But it was sometimes years. And this didn't sound like it was a case of years. It sounded like it was pretty quick.
Yes, I think this is why this particular case, at least it broke the mold in my mind, because it actually, because of who this young girl was, meaning she was just a young college student, it made international news. It made People magazine. And the facts of the case, they were missing because nobody knew my office's involvement. I knew, though, and I was beating the out of myself every single day saying, why didn't I just hold on to him, physically hold on to his shirt, and things that are completely unrealistic.
That you can't do.
There was no way I could have done
that doesn't
like
stop.
That.
The logical doesn't stop the emotions.
Exactly. And, you know, I've had a couple of things happen to me before I even started this job. I lost both my parents before I was 30. I lost my dad when I was a freshman in high school, and he was my hero, my everything, my best bud. And so I thrived in chaos, and I thrived in other people's chaos, and I was a fixer. I wanted to fix the problem. How can I make this better? And so as long as I was involved in this cycle of craziness that goes on inside of a county jail, the banging, the yelling, the sirens, the alarms, the fights, the yelling, the screaming, it was like, I have a job to do and this is what I'm doing. And then the day after she was killed, I needed a way to do something to make it so that this didn't happen in vain. And I Googled, how do you write a legislative proposal? And I got the instructions and I wrote one. And I wrote one to be named after her. And I sent it to politicians and I sent it to my judge friends, and they all thought it was a great idea, but nobody would sign off on it because it would call for somebody's bond to be held without bond or restricted completely if they had another pending case that involved a domestic partner that was former or current. So I tried to channel my grief and anger and rage into that. And the night that I found out that she had been killed, I did walk out. I grabbed all my stuff. I used some very colorful language, and I went out into the parking lot to leave forever.
I can guarantee you use colorful language. If you're like me, which it sounds like you are, I'd been like, and another thing, and I've been talking the entire time as I was leaving, crying, yelling, the whole 9 yards.
Oh, yeah. I probably could have lifted the back end of a car with one hand at that point. I had so much adrenaline and rage and grief and I was absolutely furious. I called one of my friends who was a sheriff's deputy, and he couldn't understand me. He said, "Where are you? I can't hear you. Are you okay? What's happening? Stop screaming. What's going on?" I called my one very dear friend who I talk to this day, who's a retired magistrate, who's like a father to me. And he said, "Oh, Kelly, oh my God, I'm so sorry this happened." And it was like, don't tell me you're sorry. And I understand the need to say, I am so sorry that this happened. But it was like, there's a family out there that's making funeral arrangements right now, and it didn't have to go this way.
No. And by the way, and I'm not saying this to you personally, but it was the system's job to protect that person.
Yeah.
And in this case, at least, and far too often, the system did not work. It did not do its job. No. All that had to be channeled somewhere. And usually what winds up happening is it can't just be professionally, it's also personally. Did that happen with you? Yes, it did. In a couple of years after this case happened, I found an organization that works with grieving children and their families. I'm going to try really hard not to get emotional here. I became a volunteer there, and officers were actually advising me against it, saying, "Kelly, how are you going to volunteer at a place that works with grieving kids and their families when you still talk about your dad?" As if, I'm not supposed to talk about my dad, as if grief is supposed to have an expiration date. And I would listen, and I would go to write the volunteer coordinator an email, because I had set up for a January training, January of 2019, right before my 40th birthday. And
when I'd go to write her, I would start to backspace slowly, and then someone would throw a case on my desk, and it would give me a good excuse to X out of the email, and I thought, I'll deal with that later. Well, I never did send that email. I showed up instead, and it's a very small staff of 5 people, and it was 29 hours of training, and they were training us about grief and the activities that we would do with the families. We used our own experiences of grief in our own personal lives. And so for the first time in over 25 years, I was actually grieving my dad. I was using my dad in these training exercises. And these 5 staff members are just angels. They're absolutely brilliant. And I had taken the Pittsburgh police test many times. I wanted to be a cop very bad, but I could never run fast enough. I just could not do it.
Club.
No
I don't
how
run
much
now.
I trained.
By the way, unless they're chasing me a gun or I got a gun and I'm chasing someone, there's no running involved. I'll take a car.
Yes, exactly.
And by the way, we used to run in Baltimore in the wintertime, and it was so cold. That cold air hits you. I can imagine Pittsburgh being the same way. Did you transition into becoming a therapist?
Yes, I did. I started volunteering at this organization and just, well, tell me about yourself, Kelly. What do you do? And I work at a jail. And then I got more comfortable and I started to share some stories because I have many, many stories in 14 and a half years that ended similarly to this one. And they were saying, oh, my God, Kelly, that's terrible. And I'm thinking, really?
I know.
That's not a healthy environment
I get
to
that
be in.
I still get that, and it's part of the reason why I don't talk about my police experience too much, because people are shocked. My wife now is shocked at some of the things I tell her, and she goes, I can't believe you went through that. And I'm like, what? It's just I called it Tuesday. We're talking with Kelly Robertson. She is a former bail investigator for the state of Pennsylvania. She left that job, which she explained why. 2 places to find her. Kelly Rae Reports. It's RAE. Kelly Rae Reports on X, and also her website, mindfulcoastcounseling.com. That's where she does the therapy work. mindfulcoastcounseling.com. Kelly, thanks for your service, and thanks for talking all about it on Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. Both very much appreciated.
It's an honor. Thank you for having me.
I'd like to thank our guests for coming on the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. The Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show is a nationally syndicated weekly radio show broadcast on numerous AM and FM radio stations across the country. We're always adding more affiliate stations. If you enjoyed the podcast version of the show, which is always free, please do me a favor and tell a friend or 2 or 3. I'll be back in just a few days with another episode of the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show and Podcast. Until then, this is John J. Wiley. See ya.
Hey, it's Howie Mandel, and I am inviting you to witness history as me and my Howie Do It gaming team take on Gilly the King and Wallow 267's $1 million gaming in an epic Global Gaming League video game showdown. 4 rounds, multiple games, 1 winner, plus a halftime performance by multi-platinum artist Travie McCoy. Watch all the action and see who wins and advances to the championship match against Neo right now at globalgamingleague.com. That's globalgamingleague.com. Everybody games.
The college basketball playoffs are here, and now you can trade the tournament in all 50 states on Kalshi. Trade games and tournament outcomes, spreads, and more on top seeds and potential Cinderella stories legally. On Kalshi, you're trading against peers in a live market, meaning there's no house. And as the odds move, you can buy in and out of your position all tournament long. For a limited time, download the Kalshi app and use code HEART to get $10 when you trade 10. Kalshi. Kalshi. Trade on anything.
They trust you with everything. Their scraped knees, their big questions, their growing bodies. So when you choose a supplement for your family, you don't compromise. At AzureWell, we put the full truth on the label. Every ingredient, every amount. And we test beyond industry standards to ensure what's listed is what's inside. AzureWell, the standard you hold for your family, reflected back to you. Visit AZURELivingwell.com. These products have not been evaluated by the FDA and are not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease.
If you like the show, please take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe. It really does help the show to grow. Thank you for listening.